Hello, everyone. Welcome to Expanded Knowledge. We have a lot of action going on this week with new UAP, UFO whistleblowers coming forward and some pretty big events on the horizon with tomorrow night. There's going to be a new interview with Ross Colart, the journalist for NewsNation. We'll be interviewing a new whistleblower. So we're going to get into that. There's also another whistleblower that came out recently. And yes, so I wanted to make this video to just talk about it here, to kind of just go over the basics real quick. There's plenty of videos out there that are covering what the first whistleblower said in the interview he did on the Jesse Michaels show. And then kind of there's been like a teaser from NewsNation about this other whistleblower. So here I'm just going to go over and basically share my thoughts and my insights, my kind of analysis of it. What I really want to do next week, because I watched the whole interview with Jesse Michaels, and we'll get into this, and I'll post some images up on the screen. But in the first whistleblower, who gave a whole, I think it was like an hour and a half interview to Jesse Michaels, and it's often those little things throughout. It could just be one thing that they say or one nuance that I think often sheds light on very interesting angles into the bigger picture. So I have a bunch of bookmarks from that hour and a half interview. I want to make a video going over that because there was at least a couple very interesting details, nuances that whistleblower shared. And then there's also even somewhat of a response from at least one source on YouTube to this person seeming to try to discredit them. This is the Randy Anderson. So we're going to get into this. And then obviously after tomorrow, when the NewsNation interview airs, there's going to be a lot to talk about. So I'm going to do the same thing probably with that. But it's been a busy week, and I am really short on time. So the way I'm going to be doing this today, rather than presenting slides or anything like that and queuing up clips, I'm just going to be sharing with you my screen of what I've filtered down to the recent videos about these new whistleblowers. And so we'll kind of use this as a reference point here, starting on the bottom. All right. So yes, if you haven't seen, there are two new UFO whistleblowers here coming out. Okay. These are recent or active or recently active military gentlemen. And the first one that we see here is an individual named Randy Anderson. Okay. And he went on the Jesse Michaels show and did an interview. And this seems to be the way that he chose to come out and share his story, his claims. And to be just give you the bullet point of it, essentially, he was a Green Beret. And if you don't know what a Green Beret is, it's basically a special forces unit of the United States military. It's like the Navy SEALs, elite. You have to be go through very elite physical training and also mental, intellectual training. And so if you're a Green Beret, you're pretty highly qualified and competent individual, very much so. So apparently he really is a Green Beret. He provided all of his military documentation to Jesse Michaels, all his forms and everything. Also, I mean, Jesse Michaels has a big YouTube channel and has his own kind of reputation and credibility at stake. So I'm going to just assume that Jesse Michaels did the proper vetting. He has mentioned before that he decided not to interview the whistleblower Jason Sands, who we also got to get to in this little overview here today, because he recently came out. So there's actually three. Now, Jason Sands, he came out in the James Fox documentary, actually came out earlier because it leaked. But he went on the Julian Dory podcast also this week. The second longer part of that just dropped today, and I really want to watch that. It's definitely worth watching. It's very interesting because he's being put in the hot seat. Julian Dory, in my perception, is he's really grilling Jason Sands, and he's very skeptical of the whole story. I mean, he said that himself. He doesn't believe a lot of it. And I think he gives Jason Sands an opportunity to really talk there, but we'll touch on that. And also, that's probably going to be a separate video. So let's get through the bullet points today here, and just to kind of um, analyze this, let you know what I think before we go into tomorrow night, which is going to be this interview. All right, so back to the Jesse Michaels show, and we branched off there because Jesse Michaels said on the record he did not interview Jason Sands because he didn't kind of pass his own personal whatever test of vetting. So the fact that Randy Anderson, this Green Beret whistleblower, is here on Jesse Michaels show, I mean, we can kind of take a preliminary assumption that he was really checked out, not to mention, he provided all the documentation and all that. Now, there's nothing in the interview. Jesse Michaels does not ask if Randy Anderson went to Arrow, if he went to the UAP task force. He doesn't ask him, if he submitted or gave testimony to the Senate Intelligence or the House Intelligence Committees or any of the congressional or governmental authorities. I missed that, but I watched the whole interview. I did not see those kind of questions, and that's always where I begin, honestly, because technically you can be a whistleblower but not go through any of those processes. And to me, it's less credible, because if you're willing to go stand under oath, and you're willing to go to Washington and give your testimony to all these serious people and provide all of this documented evidence, I mean, you're doing quite a lot to try to be a grifter, as the buzz term is, with people that are very skeptical about these whistleblowers. And look, everyone's entitled to their opinion for sure, but I just try to look at it logically. I don't think, and that's kind of where a lot of people don't want to believe Jason Sands, because he says some wild stuff. But I mean, and this James Fox asked him then in the documentary, and James Fox says in the documentary, what do you say to people who think you're just absolutely nuts right now? And Jason Sands' answer is, well, I went to Congress, I went to all the authorities, I gave them all of the details. So, and he says, I get it. It sounds insane. But, a lot of people I'm seeing are wanting to kind of write off Jason Sands, and maybe because it's just the kind of disturbing or seemingly unbelievable, some of his things that he says. But we'll get into that. So Randy Anderson, I definitely recommend you go watch that on Jesse Michaels. I don't know, there was no questions like from Jesse to Randy, like, would you go to a hearing and testify under oath? Those kind of questions I think are important to establish, because then it kind of makes it very clear that this dude is dead serious, and he's ready to go, have his feet put to the fire. And basically, Randy's claims is fairly simple. He was a Green Beret. He was called in to do training for a special top secret clearance classified project. He was brought underground, which is pretty interesting, at a base. He even names the exact base, which is significant. It's a base in Indiana. I haven't written down the exact name, but it has to do with the Navy's crane service. It's a special operation service. And so this base, and I believe it was Indiana was the state that it's in. So he gives a specific base, and he says that he went far down in an elevator into some underground base, and then he was brought into a room. He says that there was a sign on the door that said off-world technology. And I mean, that sounds like, I'm sure a lot of people will scoff at that, but even Randy himself in the interview says, I don't know if they were messing with us or if that's just how they label stuff down there. But, he says that's what he saw. And then he went to the room. He saw what he said was a basketball-sized sphere levitating in the air. And he said just the energy coming off of it, in his experience, it just seemed like it was something, as he put it, not from here, or something off-world, or something that just made him kind of uneasy. And he says the people, the more senior people that were training him, and at least one or two other people, other soldiers or Green Berets, they just seemed to be trying to get his reaction. And then, he heard a little bit of talk about it, about that it was recovered from a crash retrieval, and that it had something to do with electromagnetic, anti-gravitic types of propulsion and energy. And that's basically his story. Now, I will make a full video on that interview, hopefully within the next week. But that's all I'm going to say about Randy Anderson right now. And of course, the timing does seem orchestrated. You have Julian Dory putting Jason Sands on the hot seat coming out this week. That's out this week. Just the larger part dropped today with James Fox. You have Randy Anderson giving the interview to Jesse Michaels. And now Saturday, literally the last weekend night, besides Sunday, before the inauguration of the new presidential campaign of Donald Trump on Monday. So this all does seem definitely orchestrated by probably a group of these people with influence and position and connections to try to bring this forward. And I will say, before we go any further, as a net whole, I am seeing good signs here. And I'll touch on that today as to why. I'm always going to be skeptical and cautious around this subject, around anything, because I do think that there are, just bad players in the system. And I don't think they're just going to give up easily on whatever it is that they've been holding about this UFO, UAP secrecy, this topic, this subject. So I'm always cautious, and I'm always cautious of psychological operations and to mold the public's perception, especially around this topic, which we know from declassified documents that they have been intentionally doing at least since 1953, but probably right away in the late 40s when this began happening, at least in the modern era. So we'll get back to Randy Anderson. Pretty interesting. And I'll say he seems a little nervous in the interview, but I was very cautious at first, but he does actually, to me, seems like a down-to-earth, chill, genuine guy. But I don't think you could ever really know from watching a video. But again, I'm going to probably trust that Jesse Michaels feels the same way. And, assuming that Jesse Michaels is not being used by any intelligence, operations. So I'll stick to that interpretation for now. Now, let's touch briefly on Jason Sands. Okay. What you need to know about Jason Sands is, well, number one, if you haven't even heard of him, then just watch James Fox's documentary called The Program, and you'll see Jason Sands, and you'll see him give his story and get questioned and all that. If you are someone that has been following the Jason Sands things now for a long time, the last, I don't know, however many 6+ months, he came out on Twitter after his name accidentally got leaked by a post from James Fox, yada, yada, yada. Anyway, real quick, Jason Sands worked at Area 51, or rather, sorry, scratch that. He worked at Nellis Air Force Base. He may have worked at Area 51 too. I don't remember, but he definitely worked at Nellis Air Force Base. He has all his papers. He has all his documentation. He worked in a top secret, very sensitive facility, and his job was to basically monitor communications going from the base out to anywhere. So he monitored all communications coming from Nellis Air Force Base, which has been rumored to be involved in UFO and non-human intelligence activities for many decades. And what he says was a special project that sometimes dealt with these weird things like crashed UFOs. There was an incident in the early 90s where, and the video got leaked, and apparently this was a legitimate UFO sighting that everyone at the base saw. And essentially Jason's story, you can go watch it in the program documentary, but I'm going to just cut it down for you here. Jason was on patrol, routine patrol with a couple other people one day, and he says they saw a strange looking craft. It's pretty bizarre. As he describes it, had like horns and was kind of like a little pod. It wasn't like a disc or a triangle or anything like that. And then they said that they saw a being who was human, but had blue-ish skin, and but had sort of different eyes, and was actually wearing a military uniform. And as he says it in the documentary, he says the same uniform just like us, fatigues. So it's a pretty unique case. There was a blue-skinned sort of non-human being out there on Nellis Air Force Base, with their craft. And basically, he says that this creature, this being, communicated with him telepathically, and essentially was like asking him if they had a certain supply of something that he needed for his craft. And Jason says he never heard of what he was asking for. And then the being just allegedly left him and went back. And then him and two other people in his patrol craft saw this UFO lift up, kind of, and then move away. So that's what he says happened. I understand a lot of people find that really hard to believe. I personally don't. Yes, I do, obviously, because I've never seen an alien. We haven't seen any kind of verified, like, they actually exist in this form and are here, even though we have all of these accounts. And I don't think that people are making it up. I think people are really seeing things as they see it. But this still holding on to the possibility and the skepticism of, like, is it something psychic? Is it something they're imagining? I personally don't think that at this point. I wouldn't find it hard to believe that there are other beings that are interacting with our world. And we now have many, many people that are saying that, and not just people. I mean, credentialed people who have gone through the ringers and spoken about it. Carl Nell, David Grush, Elizondo, all of these people. And now we have these new whistleblowers coming forward. So, yes, it sounds unbelievable, but I just don't see why this guy would do this, unless he just thinks he's going to get rich. I'm not really seeing that. He gave all of his documentation over. I'm not really seeing James Fox willing to put himself and his career on the line after vetting this guy and his story. Jason Sands he went to Arrow, he went to Congress and gave his testimony to them and gave him documentations, locations, names, and all that. So for me, it's like, why would you do all that if you're just making this up? But we shall see. And to his credit, he's going out there and he's going on these hard podcasts like a Julian Dory, which is going to have a huge um, audience, and he's getting grilled. And I'll say I watched the first. You see at the top there's the first hour and a half, which was released, and I watched that, and I thought at the beginning, Jason, you could see, was feeling a little bit kind of nervous, but then he kind of settles in, and I think he's taking the heat pretty well, and he had good answers, and he's just kind of sticking to his story, showing. James Fox makes him kind of show all the documents of where he worked, legitimately 100% worked on this secret program. So the question then just becomes, like, for people with authority in Congress and whatever comes out of this to start investigating this. I mean, take exactly where Jason Sands pointed them to, because not just us on YouTube here listening to him. He did tell this all to congressional investigators. Go there and see. Is this like a crash retrieval operation? Like, what is happening here? Um, and that'll lead into the Ross Colart whistleblower now. So let's leave Jason Sands there for now. Watch that first hour and a half, and now, just like a couple hours ago, I noticed that another 2.5 hours with Jason Sands was put on. Julian Dory put a little teaser in the last episode, and the teaser showed an interesting moment where Jason it seemed like what I could tell from, like, the 10 seconds was Julian was probably what seemed to be asking Jason Sands about his claim that he was ordered to shoot and kill an alien. And James Fox in the little teaser is very uncomfortable and says, like, if you're going to talk about that, I'm going to leave. He says, I think that's a credibility destroyer. And you could see it gets tense. And then Jason says, like, I don't need to talk. I won't talk about it. And that was Julian's teaser. So I'm very interested to see how that all went down. And yes, if you followed, after the program came out, like the day after the program came out, Jason Sands did an interview on a YouTube channel, podcast or something, and he did say that he was ordered to shoot or ordered to kill an alien. And if you listen closely to Jason in another interview he did, which was rare at the time, some months ago, it was the first face-to-face interview he did. He alluded to this problem that's going to be need to be addressed. Allegedly, what he says is that non-human biologics that have been captured, as David Grush, testified in his whistleblower case under oath and submitted his 4-year investigation for, some of these non-human biologics were still alive, according to Jason Sands, and they're sort of being held captive in some of these underground bases, secret bases. And Jason says that's an issue that needs to be addressed because allegedly these beings want their people back, and this is sort of a point of an issue here. And maybe some of this stuff will lead into the other new whistleblower that we'll be seeing tomorrow night, named Jake Barber. So let's leave Jason Sands there. Again, I'm thinking I'm going to make a full video on Jason Sands and this important, very important interview where he is put to the fire on the Julian Dory show, big show. And obviously it's all happening around the same time. So we can start to connect all these dots. Okay, so let's look at the next part here. And if you, haven't seen that, NewsNation gave a little teaser, and I thought it was pretty interesting. I'm going to share a little side note here that was kind of interesting for me. It was another day for me working, and it was something like intuitive in my intuition and in my consciousness, and I was like, I just had like a hunch. And you know how it's been with this whole UFO subject. It's like weeks go by and like nothing really happens. And I just had a hunch the other day that like something massive just dropped. I was like, I'm thinking like the next something like bigger than Grush, bigger than whatever is just came out. And I went to YouTube, and sure enough, the first thing I saw was that video you see on the bottom there. Air Force veteran whistleblower claims to have worked on UFO retrieval program. So Ross Colart, as he stated in a video yesterday, he was working with this gentleman for 2 years. And Ross hasn't said it yet, or I haven't seen it in any of the News Nation's previews, but I'm going to assume that this gentleman went through all of the official processes. At least I'm assuming he gave all his information to Arrow, and I would think most likely the Senate or House Intelligence Committees, or the Gang of Eight, and Congress, and possibly, and I'm thinking the UAP task force as well, because in the little clip of his interview that you can watch, he does mention the UAP task force and reporting to senior members of the UAP task force. So I think we can assume, we'll see tomorrow. And the way that Ross reports, and if you read his book In Plain Sight, and if you've seen how he did all, David Grush and everything else, he does his homework. He doesn't want to be the journalist bringing forward half-baked stuff. I think he's proven that publicly. So we're getting here a whistleblower that is legitimate, meaning he went through all of the official channels. And here's what's significant about what we know is that he was a helicopter pilot, a very highly ranking, highly skilled, specialized helicopter pilot. And he looked down on a craft that he said was egg-shaped, that was white. That might sound a little bit different, and because we're used to, disc, saucers, orbs, or triangles, and all the other ones, but the egg shape is not necessarily as common. However, and shout out to the UFO researcher Michael Schratt, who he has a very interesting project that he's done where he's made illustrations of the stories that were reported to Leonard Stringfield, who was a UFO crash retrieval researcher, and it was very controversial and taboo at the time in the UFO community in the late 70s when Leonard Stringfield started doing that. And I'll actually throw a link to my video on Leonard Stringfield in the clip below. But anyway, this tangent is, I'm just saying, Michael Schratt did a cool project where he took Leonard Stringfield's case studies and then made illustrations for them, and he knows them very well. I had him on a podcast before, which actually I'll throw that in the link too if you want to check that out. But I say this because I remember an egg-shaped craft very early, like in the 50s. So these have been going on. And anyway, in the clip we see in the News Nation teaser, Jake Barber, That's the name of this gentleman, Jake Barber. And he says it was egg-shaped, white, and he says that to him it just wasn't human. It just didn't seem, it looked ridiculous, he says, and it just seemed, and it wasn't, there was no visible propulsion, and so he thinks it's non-human. And apparently there's a video, apparently from the helicopter, of this crash retrieval. So allegedly, what we're going to be getting on the News Nation special tomorrow night, Saturday, January 18th at 8 p.m., we're allegedly going to be getting a video of a crash retrieval. Okay. Now, that's a huge thing that's possibly going to happen. Assuming this is all real, which I'd be shocked if Ross Coulthart News Nation would do this unless it was. Even News Nation is like, they have covered this. I think they've probably realized how much, attention it gets them, but they're still very skeptical in general, I think. So it's very significant because, and he's a first-hand participant. So he's claiming that he worked on the crash retrieval program. This is what we've been waiting for. This is the kind of person that we hoped would be at the hearing, one of Grush's 40 whistleblowers, or someone, this general, reality that Grush has blown the whistle on. This is someone that we need. We need these first-hand people. All right. So why I think this is so significant is what we'll kind of wrap up here. Is that this, if it all goes well, would indeed move the needle significantly. It's no longer, okay, David Grush said that this is going on. We're going to apparently have this guy saying, I literally retrieved a crashed UFO, worked on the program for it, and I have a video of it. And that's going to be major. And of course, if it all checks out that it's non-human, because we have to remember there are human-made crafts that could fool you to think that they're aliens. And so I think we have to keep that in mind. But that's still one of the things that it will be interesting to watch as this all unfolds. And one of the key things, I think, actually. But it's not just, okay, there's UFOs and there's aliens and we're not alone, as they like to say. The thing that's going to come out from this is a level deeper than that, or even a couple levels deeper than that. It's not only are they real and all of that, but we have literally been taking them and studying them. And again, I've said this in many videos before, the key aspect there is going to be, do they tell us that they figured out the technology, or do they fool us by saying, yes, this has all been going on, but we can't even understand what's happening. Now, I should mention this, and we're going to get deeper into this in my standalone videos for each of these whistleblowers. 3, really. I know Sands is already established, but I'm putting him on this list of these 3 key whistleblowers right now who could easily be called to a hearing next month. All right. That's Jason Sands, Jake Barber, and Randy Anderson. All verified military people, and apparently Jake Barber with video. We'll see tomorrow night. So the key thing will be, how far are we with the technology? Because that's what's going to make the difference. Okay. If it's true, which a lot of people have claimed, a lot of people have studied and made this argument, which you can't conclude 100% one way or another, but I do think that the evidence allows you to conclude that it's very probable that we have figured out an exotic form of propulsion that is essentially whatever it might be, electromagnetic, anti-gravitic, a combination, plasma, something that has been kept classified in black programs and would totally revolutionize our world, essentially, because you could replace oil and all that other stuff in theory. So that's what I think we really have to be looking for, and how it shakes out is, okay, like, what's the human component here? What's the non-human component here? But I think there's good signs for that, because if you read Ross Coulthart's book, he's kind of sniffing out that trail. He talks about what's his name, the Navy physicist. I forget his name, but there was a Navy physicist who was designing patents, and they were approved. And Coulthart is kind of wondering if we don't already have this figured out, and already had it figured out in the 50s, and then it was suppressed. To me, that's going to be the big game changer. And to end it off here, you see in the top there, what's the name, Dr. Stephen Greer, and he actually just started a podcast, which is pretty interesting. And you can see the kind of reach he has. Look at that, already 300,000 views. So very controversial figure. I will say I've listened to the guy speak a lot. I've read a good amount of his materials, and I will say that I think that you can't ignore. This is like a separate video. I don't want to drag on here about Stephen Greer, but you can't deny the objective work that he's done and the path that he's paved for this kind of information to get out there. I mean, when he came out with his stuff in 2001, it just seemed like the most tinfoil hat, crackpot stuff. UFO crash retrievals, the government covering it all up, all of that. And now we see where we're at now. And he wrote his book Disclosure, he wrote his book Unacknowledged, and made the documentary. And he literally spoke to all of these people. He spoke to the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, Admiral Thomas Wilson, and all of that. All this stuff people talk about in the UFO community, a lot of it was, a good amount of the significant stuff was initiated by Stephen Greer. So on the flip side of that, yeah, I do think that he seems, from what I can see, to be a big personality, an abrasive personality. It seems like he seems to be, with all due respect, he does seem to be somewhat kind of egotistical. And maybe you have to be like that kind of person, though, to do the kind of stuff that he's done. I mean, how many of us are willing to, like, go balls to the wall and, like, go into Washington and, talk to these whistleblowers where, like, potentially we could be, like, killed at any moment? I mean, so I think you got to give him credit, but at the same time, you do need to keep that grain of salt nearby, because I'll end it on this. I have noticed instances where he misquotes things slightly or exaggerates things slightly. And I could talk about that in another context, but for the brevity of the video, let's move along. And I'm just going to say, check out his podcast. It's worth listening to what he has to say. And I think it's just funny how a lot of the things that people have jumped on the bandwagon of, like, just thinking that he's totally a grifter or totally, just a con man or something. A lot of things he's been saying for a long time we're now seeing are getting, about to be released publicly. We'll see. I understand the skepticism of a lot of people. I think us, let's say, in the UFO community, who are kind of accepting that there's really is something to this, I think that you have to come to that conclusion if you study it closely enough. I think, to wrap it up here, we should watch out for tomorrow is just feel it out. I do think there's always a possibility of a very brilliant, elaborate psychological operation. And the key things to look at tomorrow is if Jake Barber suspects that there are advanced human run programs, because that's the question that I think we should look at first, is, like, how far is the reverse engineering? Do we have a secret space program? Have we gone out into the solar system through a very secret program, as many have claimed? And do we have the energy figured out? Because then it's going to be okay. It's going to be an extremely complicated process on so many different ways. It's going to be a huge disruptor, and I think shocker to society. But I think we need that ultimately. I think we can handle the truth, as many have said now for many decades. And I do have faith that we'll be all right. There are sinister forces, I believe, out there in the world, at the elite kind of top of the pyramid of world power. And I do think they're not just going to let this go easily, but I think we have enough people out there fighting for this that something good will come for it. And I think it's exciting. Let's see what happens tomorrow. And I think that's what I have to say. I wanted to keep this shorter. I want to do deeper dives on all the whistleblowers because the details are going to be where the real important stuff is. So that's what I'll be watching for tomorrow, and hopefully this will come out. I think even as weird as it is, and as weird as it might be, and awkward and just shocking ontologically for a lot of people. I mean, if this is really what's going on, how much longer are we going to kick the can down the road? And I, for one, am happy to be alive in this time period, in this generation, to see this, and for all of us, and to actually be involved and a part of it. So that's what I got to say on that. Thank you again. I will see you probably next week with a breakdown of one of these two new whistleblowers, and then the Jason Sands really on the hot seat on Julian Dory show. I think that's kind of stuff is important. So have a great day. Tune in there tomorrow on News Nation, and have a great weekend. I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.